Hi everyone, welcome to Gnan Cloud Garage. In this session, I'm going to talk about building our own lab, adapting to industry shifts and innovation. And our own lab, it will help us to practice either a on-premises solutions or edge location solution, and also any of the cloud solutions. Okay, so it's always help us to build our personal lab for learning and growth. So here is the quick agenda. We already realized that we need to create a lab, either we call it as personal lab or home lab. And first, let's quickly recap what is our personal lab and why are we creating a lab and how do we learn best. And let's understand the differences between personal and professional labs and family acceptance factor. So that means a spouse acceptance factor, acquiring hardware for personal labs and personal lab commonly used softwares and real world examples of home lab kits, and finally extra resources to start our lab journey. Okay, now let's start with the before start our why we need to create a lab. So first, if you recall, the pace of technology, the change is accelerating. The famous quote from the Albert Einstein, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. So when you notice, when we plan to create a lab, the constants of change, AI, ML, and data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it's a keep on evolving. And when it comes to hardware technology, most common core hardware technologies are compute, that means servers, and networking, that means switches, either a production switches or management switches, and storage, it can be a file storage, block storage, or object storage, any kind of storages, and information security. So information security applicable for all the above areas. So how can we keep pace with change? Definitely the answer is we decide to build a personal lab. Okay, now let's understand what is our personal lab. As we are aware, a place to try new things, a place to learn and growth, and a place to move fast and break things, and is not production, but should not be a dependency for our home production networks. But in general, most of the time, we cannot always get a scheduled downtime to try something new in the production. So that time, if you have any doubt, well, let's say, for example, I want to migrate a virtual machine from one cluster to another cluster. But we know within a cluster, we can migrate the VM from one ESX host to another ESX host without downtime. But when you got this kind of questions from customer, shall we be possible to migrate the virtual machines from cluster 1 to cluster 2? That time you got a query, but if you want to test it in the production, definitely it's not possible. But in the office scenarios, we may use our test labs, or suppose if you are working on a edge locations, definitely there will be no test option. So that time we can also utilize our home lab. We can experiment whether we are able to migrate or not. This is one scenario. Like this, there may be so many scenarios. Our personal lab will it will clear us all our technical queries. Okay. Now, let's understand another key point. Why are we creating a lab and how do we learn best? So a bit of learning theory to start us off. So four main learning styles. One is visual, auditory, reading and writing, and finally hands-on. If you observe the first three options, visual, auditory, read and writing, we are already aware the first three learning styles are, we call it as theory. So typically IT training, visual, auditory, and also documentation, that means reading and writing, and the certification land here. Okay, so only for first three only it's applicable, but they can be good, but they are limited only. When it comes to the fourth option, that is the hands-on. So the hands-on means lab environments are the fourth type. So they are hands-on and learning by applying the knowledge. So as I mentioned, we cannot always get a scheduled downtime to try something new in production. So we recommend to depend on a hands-on lab and test environments, because we want to learn new things and new technologies, new techniques, and new methods of solutioning a problem, as it is why many of us are in this career field. Okay. And sometimes if you want to provide a solution to any problem also, we need a test lab to test it. And in addition, another example is building a lab is like providing a small child with a box full of building blocks, walk away and come back in couple of hours. We will see why almost everyone has potential to become an engineer. Okay. And last but not the least, IT practitioners must own their professional development. And I also recall another quick quote is related to learning. The beautiful thing about learning is that no one can take it away from you. Okay. Now, another key point, what is the difference between personal lab and professional labs? If we quickly identify these captures, the first one left one, this diagram is my personal lab. Initially, I started with one personal laptop. Then one by one, I'm just buying the Intel NUC mini kits, Homelab kits. And this is also due to my budget constraints. I am not bought the new one. I just bought only the refurbished and used ones only. And also I have one assembled desktop PC. And to communicate all these devices, we need one managed, instead of manager switch, I'm just using unmanaged switch. And for storage, I'm using a Synology 6 TB storage. But when it comes to the professional labs, they have a separate data center space. They have a rack and stack devices with compute devices, network devices, and storage devices. So the main difference is suitable compute capacity to meet our requirement. But in general, for normal small labs, like if you are planning to practice your virtualization, even one single laptop also enough. We can install your VMware Workstation trial edition for 30 days. And within that VMware Workstation, you can create multiple virtual machine, and you can install the Windows OS and another VM, you can install the Linux, and we can get the hands-on experience on Windows OS concepts as well as Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE or Ubuntu, whatever the flavor you are interested. Those Linux flavor knowledge also we can get it only within a one laptop test itself enough. Suppose if you want to explore some advanced concepts like vCenter server, managing multiple ESXi hosts with compute network storage, and if you want to practice the virtual SAN and also the NSX, VMware Cloud Foundation, that scenarios only we need to explore to the other devices to enhance our lab environment. Okay. And also modern network capable of providing intelligent routing capabilities. And generally for a routing testing, we can use a software appliances, wires router, and the storage capacity necessary to provision our working environment and maintain backups. Generally, the storage, we have a different types of storage. We have a DAS, direct attached storage, that means local storage. And we also have a NAS, network attached storage, and we have a SAN, storage area network. And within a SAN also, we have a different types of SAN, like fiber channel SAN, iSCSI SAN. And when it comes to the HCI environment, hyper converged infrastructure, we also have software defined storages such as virtual SAN, Nutanix HCI, and we also have virtual volumes. All are you can use based depends on your practice of the lab. You can choose the appropriate storages. Even nowadays, we are also using a object storages. You can also configure object storage like Harvester, or you can use any of the Red Hat Ceph storage, and also you can use ODF internal. Any multiple options are available in the current market. Depends on your lab requirement. You can appropriate labs you can set up in our home, and you can start building it and learn and grow. And a physical environment that provides the necessary power cooling to maintain the equipment. And even though the basic requirements are same for both personal and professional, the fulfillment will vary on the intent. Okay. And we don't need the same hardware like production because it's a huge cost. And when it comes to the home lab, it's a minimal cost only. And if your budget supports, you can buy a new one, or you can use a refurbished or used ones. Okay. That will also help us. But before buying, best always get the quick validation, and also the reviews must. Okay, and we don't need the same hardware for our own professional development that we need to mimic a production environment. Here mimic means it's a simulation of a production environment for a Fortune 500 company. Now let's continue to the few more points related to difference between personal and professional labs. Within a personal lab, whatever is available and cost effective, and either you can even one device also enough to practice some of the labs, and only additional labs only we can explore for a other options depends on our budget. And hosted in a tiny corner of our basement or garage, and maybe some free tier public cloud service also will help us to explore on a AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, IBM Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, and so on. And whatever goes, and what's documentation. But only challenge in our personal home labs, so there is no specific documentation, because everyone doing their individual experience. So it's a vary from, depends on individual. But we can, using the official documentation, we can also explore, try to explore it on our home labs. Sometimes, most of the time, one common issue we may end up into a compatible issues. Once you overcome those compatible issue, there will be no challenges. One example is, even earlier during my starting days, when I'm trying to install my home lab kit Intel NUC, when I'm trying to install the ESXi operating system, I end up into a network driver issue. Even I uploaded that how we can resolve that network driver issue. We have to build a custom network driver using VMware Flink's website. When you include our ESXi ISO with a custom driver, there will be no errors. So this type of challenges we may end up when we are using a trusted devices. Okay, and use it for personal learning, professional development, and content creation and self-hosting. Even my home labs and all, I'm creating more content using these devices. Okay, when it comes to the professional labs, professional lab, we can also call it as corporate labs. So like one example is VMware HOL. Publicly, VMware HOL is free to everyone, but in the back end, VMware also maintain a official data center with a number of racks, servers, compute, and network. So that's the reason we call it as enterprise grade, and hosted in data center or co-locations, and a lot of public cloud. Even VMware also recently launched the VMware Cloud Solutions, and typically matches production as closely as possible. Okay, and this is also most of the professional labs and corporate lab, it's almost similar or replica of production environment only, but here it is completely documented. But only document only missing in our home lab, but no issues. We can use official documentation. Accordingly, we can plan to simulate in personal labs, and used for testing things for your business purposes. Okay, and another key point, personal lab consideration. So here also we'll quickly, known famous quote is, happy spouse, happy house. So before we plan to implement our home lab, first we have to consider the spouse acceptance factor. Reason is, a major consideration for personal home labs. Labs, like any hobby, require some capital recurring expenditures. So it's always look for, always a room for improvement within our home lab. So hardware, electricity bill, and also software and subscription costs. So most of the time we recommend to use a evaluation edition, but sometimes we may need to get into a subscription as well, like either 180-day subscription or 1 year subscription. Okay, and in addition, other factors, noise and heat. This is common. This is expected when you are using a home lab kits, and space utilization, and also impact to the home network, Netflix, YouTube, Minecraft, and so on. And these factors should be discussed with our spouse or family, significant other, before we buy anything, as this can be major purchases. Okay, and even when we are planning to buy today, we need to look for a advanced specs only instead of going for a old specs. Or if you have budget constraint, at least you can consider N-1 version. Suppose that currently we have a Intel process, we have latest version, you can go for a N-1 or N-2 versions, like a i7 process and all. Likewise, we can reduce our cost. And acquiring hardware for personal labs, there are so many options. Just here are the some examples. When it comes to buying a server's memory and storage, there are a different experience everyone have. Well, some most commonly used one is, for servers, you can look for a eBay website, find a lot of older or off release enterprise gear of or PCs, and even some workstations comes with a huge memory like 32 GB to until the 128 GB memory. And labgo for .com, eBay search tools for servers, and vendor outlet sites, and even sometimes old models vendors will also provide some least less prices, and Amazon Wood and great source for 1L PCs, and the local e-cyclers and our employer maybe. Sometimes even even previously when I'm working in one of the consultancy organization, when the project finishes, the 5 years tender was completed, project is completely offboarded. During the decommission status, they given a offer to within the employer, we can buy with a less price some of the devices. That is one option, and sometimes they may give for a free takeaway as well. And memory, we can use a crucial.com and memory.net and eBay, either for refurbishment model or used one. And storage, you can also search in the Amazon website, Newegg and Best Buy Micro Center. And even nowadays, 1 TB drives also are now under $100. And stick to well-known brands like Samsung Discs and SanDisk, WD, Western Digital, and Crucial. And one key important note here is when you are buying a hardware, this is mostly for personal labs, or many companies have restriction that may prevent using many of these sources. But company labs typically use deprecated gear or buy dedicated new hardware for labs. Our mileage may vary. And one my personal experience, whatever I bought the refurbished and used Intel NUC models, I brought it. I'm currently staying in Singapore, so I used the Coruscant website to choose these models. Okay, but this website is most of the time in a Singapore. Maybe if you are in another region or another country, you can accordingly the local websites you can utilize for the refurbished or used models. If you have budget, you can buy, better to go for a always the new hardware only for lab requirements. And also my when I was initially started my initial desktop, when I was in work hardware tech support engineer, I bought in that time I was in India. In India, Hyderabad CTC location, I bought the hardware. My first system. It's around new system only, but it's the assembled PC. It's around 20K INR that time, and that's how I started my Homelab first. Always there is a always evolving. We need to change it to a laptop, and laptop to the when we started working on virtualization, started using a some mini PCs Homelab kits, and sometimes I also utilize my friends' labs. Sometimes I use my personal labs. Okay. And another key point, personal lab commonly used softwares. There are n number of softwares. I'm just giving few examples here. Suppose you have firewall route, FR routing, we can use BGP on Linux, and Bind9. The reason for Bind9 package is DNS. And not only Bind9, even you can configure your Windows Server 2022. Within a Windows Server 2022, you can install domain controller, configure DC, and configure DNS for the DNS as well. And also, if you want to provide a DHCP, also you can configure in Windows Server. And OpenSSL certificates homegrown CA, and even for CA configuration, you can also use a Windows Server as well. It's up to you. And GitLab, a local instance of Git for version control, and PostgreSQL for database. Not only Postgres, even you can use evolution of Microsoft SQL and Oracle databases. And TensorFlow for AML workloads, and Ubuntu Desktop for the Linux desktop for hardware, and VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion. Generally, VMware Workstation for Windows and Fusion similar like Workstation for Linux flavors, and hosted virtualization to practice our nested NSX or nested ESX labs. And VMware VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation version 4.5. Even recently, VMware launched the latest version 5. It is mainly for bare metal virtualization for hardware, and Visual Studio Code specifically for code editor of choice. Okay, and now another key point is a real world example of home lab kits. There are so many available home lab kits, but most commonly used home lab kits are Intel NUC and the latest version 13 Pro, and Asus model PN64E1, and also Supermicro E302, E300 12T models. Okay, it's most commonly used for the home lab kits. And if you want to explore extra resources to start our lab journey. There is a VMware community website, Homelab project. See what others have built. You can refer to the gitlab.com LAMW Home Lab. Within this link, you will find wide range of lab designs and dollar amounts spent over the time. Okay, and for more details and refer to the William Lum's blog. Even after seeing his blog and some of my friends' discussion only, I finalized to choose the Intel NUC model to practice in my personal lab. Okay, so maybe your decision may be different, but for to explore the more information, you can just refer these two websites. Okay, and always personal or home lab is an investment in ourselves. And finally, here are the key takeaways. Understand why we should build a lab and determining what we must build to be successful, and planning for successful build and management of lab environment. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. If you're watching this video first time, please do view, like, share, and subscribe to the Gnan Cloud Garage channel. If you're already subscribed, I appreciate all your support. Bye for now.